Hi, so this is a point counterpoint about whether FEMA should focus on equity versus equality. And this is by Alyssa Cleveland, Rebecca Elkins, Brittany Jefferson, and Isabella Tennant.
So equity requires more time and resources. Equity aims at resources to actual needs, which is ideal in practice, but the process to determine those needs takes time. FEMA would have to conduct individual or community-based vulnerability assessments, often using detailed tools such as Social Vulnerability Index. This requires more staff training, technology, and financial investments. In disaster response situations where urgency is critical, taking extra time to assess and support may delay aid and strain already limited resources. Some stakeholders argue that uniform aid distribution is simpler, faster, and less expensive, even if it's less precise. So benefits of using equity in disaster response. Uh, Equity means recognizing that not everyone starts from the same place. Using tools like a social vulnerability index helps FEMA see which communities are at greater risk, like with limited transportation, higher poverty, disability, and language barriers. Instead of giving everyone the same kind of help, equity ensures resources are delivered in a way that fits everyone's needs personally, and it leads to better recovery, stronger communities, and restores dignity during crisis.
So talking about the equality creates like consistency and efficiency. When you focus on equity, it does take a lot more time. You would have to scrap the uniform method that you have, and it would involve a lot more steps and also hiring more people because you would have to like go to each city and prepare to that. Um, there might be inconsistent aid outcomes, even though certain cases may look very similar or have similar levels of disasters, which can lead to unfair treatment. Unfair treatment can lead to distrust by the public, and it can also lead to political pushback. Um, Not every community has the same resources, so FEMA would have to account for local factors, which does mean that there would not be a standard procedure anymore. Um, so it would make it harder to prepare for certain disasters. Um, Not all areas have access to local partnerships, which can lead to some areas having more advantages than others. It's also harder to measure the outcomes. So when you look at data, it's a lot harder to like look at that and read it when each city state is getting different amounts. And the pros of the equity: improving long-term recovery outcomes. Equity over equality gives more support to the communities who need it the most. Um, for example, if we gave every single state $100, but 5 states needed $500, the $100 is not going to be used the same amount. Um, It also helps communities to build a stronger support system in the chance that there is another disaster again, which can promote less dependence on resources such as FEMA. It decreases the recovery gaps between those who have more money and resources than those who don't. If we focus on equity, um, then those who do need it the most won't have such a gap in services than those who don't. It does support economic stability for the long term, which does allow states and cities to better prepare, and it helps build a strong relationship between FEMA and the community.
So the con side of this argument is that we'd be overextending FEMA's role. So in addition to that, FEMA has already made strides for changes. And how far should the scales go? According to the Federal Emergency Agency, in April of 2021, the Biden administration released the Equity Action Plan, which included changes to FEMA that would incorporate equity into the decision-making process during disasters. As FEMA rolled out this order, they had two objectives. One was to create an agency definition of equity that aligned with its values in order to establish a framework for incorporating equity into their agency programs and to review and recommend revisions to plans and policies to make sure that equity is considered when in hopes of providing more equitable services to people and more equitable assistance. Um, Additionally, like research states that FEMA has historically denied aid requests, indicating failure to provide supporting evidence as the reason. But a data analysis from 2010 to 2021 revealed that this impacted Black majority counties more during disasters, as applicants were twice as more likely to be rejected from receiving FEMA aid because of insufficient proof that they owned or occupied homes. Because of this, and equity in FEMA's new role to incorporate equity and to make positive changes, they made an amendment to their individuals and household program, which attempted to bridge these gaps and the types of documentations that people needed to apply to prove ownership of occupancy. Um, though individual aid is distributed through standards of equality, FEMA has taken great strides to incorporate equity into its practice to help better like balance those skills already. Next slide. Um, but then the pro of this, these tools do already exist. Are we asking FEMA to overextend their role or to properly like utilize the tools that they have before them right now? Equality doesn't mean that something's equal. We've kind of hit on that a few times throughout this. Countless studies have shown that there's discrepancies within FEMA's assistant programs that reveal that race and vulnerability factors are correlated with lower levels of assistance. FEMA has rolled out standardized data like the Social Vulnerability Index into its other programs. Expanding tools like that into their individual assistance programs wouldn't be an overextension of FEMA. It would make their aid more accurate and fair, especially for communities that have been historically impacted greater by recovery barriers. According to the Government Accountability Office in 2025, FEMA relies on the Social Vulnerability Index when assessing both risk and damages after disaster. The SVI is a significant tool that considers poverty, disability, government assistance, and it highlights communities that are at greater risk. Highlighting these communities is great, but it's only good if we're taking active steps to make positive impacts in these communities after acknowledging that these things exist. Asking FEMA to deliver aid based on equitable data is simply asking them to utilize the tools that they have to deliver their mission and their goals.
So why should FEMA be based on equality and not equity? So their mission is rapid relief, not redistribution. Their primary purpose is immediate stabilization after disasters. FEMA was established to coordinate fast, efficient responses to emergencies such as hurricanes, wildfires, floods, other natural disasters. And its success is measured by how quickly it can deliver shelter, food, medical support, and stabilization, not necessarily by long-term social outcomes. Rapid relief requires standardized procedures, and FEMA relies on these guidelines so that responders can act quickly without needing to determine who qualifies for different levels of aid. Equality simplifies logistics, the same forms, the same processes, the same initial assistance for all affected individuals. Equity introduces complexity that can slow life-saving efforts. An equity-based model would require FEMA to assess each survivor's socioeconomic status, historical disadvantages, or vulnerability levels before providing aid. This assessment takes time and resources, potentially delaying critical support when minutes and hours matter. Disaster response is fundamentally different from social policy work. Equity is important for addressing societal disparities, but those goals do not align with the urgent, reactive nature of emergency management. FEMA's role is to restore immediate safety and stability for everyone impacted, not to redistribute resources based on pre-existing inequalities. And staying mission-focused prevents scope creep, kind of like Isabella was touching on. If FEMA shifts towards redistribution, it risks taking on responsibilities better suited to other agencies. This could dilute its capacity to perform the rapid response functions it was created for. Next slide. So an argument for FEMA being based on equity and not equality is that disasters do not affect all communities equally. Low-income households, people with disabilities, seniors, marginalized communities face greater vulnerability and slower recovery after disasters. Providing equal aid ignores these differences and can widen existing disparities. Equity ensures that relief reaches those with the greatest need. Some households lose more, have fewer resources to rebuild, or face major barriers accessing FEMA assistance. Tailoring aid helps prevent the unequal recovery patterns historically seen after major disasters, like with Katrina and like with Maria. And further on that, equal aid can lead to unequal outcomes. If everyone receives the same initial assistance, communities with fewer pre-disaster resources still fall farther behind. Equity helps communities return to baseline at a similar pace, supporting regional stability and long-term resilience. Equity improves efficiency by prioritizing the most critical cases. For example, in crisis triage, responders routinely prioritize the most vulnerable: medical care, evacuations, shelter triage, because equal treatment would slow overall recovery. FEMA adopting an equity approach aligns with established emergency management practices. An equity-based model strengthens national resilience. When vulnerable communities recover more slowly, it creates long-term economic and social burdens for the entire region. Investing proportionately where risk and need are highest reduces future federal spending by preventing repeated cycles of loss and recovery. Fairness in disaster response is not sameness. True fairness requires recognizing that different households face different barriers and losses. And equity ensures that the system does not unintentionally privilege those who already have more resources. Okay. Okay.